Welcome back to When Destiny Calls. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. With me today, as always, Christy Foster. Christy, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well today, thank you.
Wow.
My health is getting better. I had a little cold over the week. I'm doing a lot better. My body's recuperating.
Sounds good. Well, we're happy to have you, as always. So when Destiny Calls, we are going to talk about our favorite topic, the gremlins among us. I am not insulting them. I'm just joking with them. I hope they have a sense of humor today. Okay, so archetypes. So the psychic system, this is Maurice Stein, and this is Jung's Map of the Soul by Maurice Stein. This is page 159. I'm going to read something he wrote in regards to the archetype, and then I was hoping, Christy, you might want to give some thoughts. So he says, the psychic system is unified by becoming more balanced, interrelated, and integrated. The self's influence on the psyche as a whole is mirrored by the influence of the ego upon consciousness. Like the self, the ego too has a centering order, a unifying function. Its goal is to balance, integrate functions insofar as this is possible given the existence of the complexes and defenses. In chapter 1, I discussed the ego as the center of consciousness, the locus of will. It has the ability to say I and I am, or I think, or I will. At another stage, it becomes a self-conscious psychic entity, able to say not only I am, but I know that I am. It may be the case, although one cannot be certain that the self also knows that it is. Does the archetype possess self-awareness? Does it know that it is? So that's our question today. Does the archetype know, and does it possess self-awareness? Stein goes on to say, Jung discovered what he thought to be a kind of consciousness in the archetypes. When archetypal images invade the ego, for example, and take possession of it, they have a voice, an entity, a point of view, a set of values. But it is their self-awareness within the archetypal unit itself. One myth strongly points to such awareness. When Moses confronted God at the burning bush and asked, "Who are you?" the archetypal voice replied, "I am that I am." Whatever this may mean theologically, it seems to demonstrate self-reflexive and consciousness in the archetype. So I'm just going to stop there. This is part of chapter, I think 6, and chapter 7, I'm sorry. The Psyche's Transcendence, Center, and Wholeness. This is Dr. Maurice Stein's book, Jung's Map of the Soul. But I thought we'd start with that, Christy. What are your thoughts?
Well, what first came to me when you're reading it is, I don't think most people are aware of which archetype they occupy.
Mm-hmm.
And
or which archetype occupies them.
Which archetype? Yes, that's probably a better way to say that.
Well, you could say it both ways.
And with that, I do think that's about is the attributes of the specific archetype, so you can even begin to identify whether or not you're being consumed by it or not.
Ooh.
Even like Moses, that's a really good example. I am that I am. There's a lot of content coming out about that statement alone that I've read. And the power that I am that I am is within us.
It's a
where
consciousness.
I
Yes.
think the story of Moses, it's insinuated that that is separate from us.
Mm.
The old story of I am that I am. And so I think for me, the archetypes bring a different twist to that, Dr. Lahab, that I haven't put those two together until you read that, because of course we are that.
Yes.
Yeah. So
It is us. We are that.
mhm.
Yeah. It's one of the same. It's like we don't know where we start, where it ends, or where it ends and where we start. We start at the same point in time.
Right.
We function with the archetypes. We function with our archetypes. The chief archetype is called the self. It's the architect. It is the person that orders everything. It is the archetype of order, the self is called. It keeps everybody in line. It keeps all the different archetypal energies in a place. And then we have these overarching archetypes that basically run us through the world in their form. That we call magicians or queens or kings or warriors or Amazonians or lovers. This is what we are looking at. So when the chief architect or the archetype of order, sorry, it's a much higher ground to be the archetype of order than the chief architect. So the archetype of order, the self, is the balancing. It keeps everybody centered. It keeps everybody on task. The task is to become aware of who and what and where, that what I am, that I am. I am that I am. That is its ultimate goal, to make you aware of that.
That's a big concept.
Yes. That's what the self does. There's archetypal patterns that run through us that move us in the world in certain ways. They give us form. And those archetypal patterns are the magician, the queen archetype, and whatever has split off from those original symbols that are associated with them. So there's a lot of archetypes that are associated with the main four. Ultimately, you always go back to the main four. That's where the well of knowledge comes from.
And if someone isn't aware of their own self through experience from trauma, or really not having an identity that they can, like a sovereign identity, my question is, what I see with people that as clients is, if there's been trauma in their lives, it's very difficult for them to even see who they are as self, let alone an archetype.
Well, yeah, that's what blocks us from becoming what the Jungians refer to as individuated or whole. What blocks us from becoming whole is basically, we use different words today. We use terms like disembodied. So what we're talking about is wholeness. We're talking about the ability to be within your physical self, at the same time, be able to connect to your psychic self, and that they're one of the same. That's what integration ultimately is. Then the more integrated you are, the more you have to treated that trauma, is what I hear you saying. So the more you want to become closer to what pop psychology calls the real you. I think they use the term, the real you.
Yes.
To become the real you, you have to overcome that which holds you and tears you apart. because what the traumatic events do, because they're dissociated, is it's a screaming, gnawing irritation that won't go away. It's always there. It's always present. It's present in the way I think about the world. The world's unsafe. It's present in the way I feel about the world and want to move through the world. Well, if it's unsafe, then I shouldn't go out.
And don't you think people are led? So is this the archetype doing the leading for someone to be introduced to another way of healing, another person? I believe we're always being guided to heal. And to really come into that sense of I am that I am.
That's the self. The self is the guide.
Yeah.
The self is always pulling that which is, that used to be housed in the ego back to it. It's a projection of, the ego is a projection of the self. It's an archetypal projection. So that's why the ego sometimes gets a bad rap. Because it is what it is, but it's a piece, it's a projection of the greater archetype.
And we need a healthy ego.
Yes, absolutely. The ego has to be able to stand up for you until you reach a certain maturity level where you could stand up without the ego standing up for you. You don't need the inner voice, you know, the outer voice works. They're one.
Point.
So the inner voice is needed for, I want this for myself. I need this for myself. I need to make this for myself. I need to create this for myself. Once you get over that point, then your overarching view of the world becomes about, how do I connect these things that I enjoy doing to better help in the bigger world? So now you're not looking at a small pond anymore. You're looking at the ocean. You're going, how can I make my boat withstand the waves of the ocean and be out there in the middle of the ocean? Because that's where I need to be. I don't want to be sitting in a pond anymore. It doesn't work. Your vision becomes clearer, much bigger than it used to be.
And that's where destiny really does come in.
Yes. And that's where all the archetypes, you start to see the archetypes and the archetypal patterns moving, right? Like an integrated blanket across time. They move in and out of each other. They don't, the idea that they're separate from each other is because our mind can't absorb it. They are pieces of each other. Sorry?
Can you give an example of that, how they move within each other?
Yes, like a blanket that has a lot of different colors string. So the blanket, when you put it out and it reflects the light, different colors are being reflected in the blanket. That's how the archetypal movements move. They move, they're weaved together, they move together. So their motion in the world is design. There's a design to it, there's a movement to it. It knows its design, knows its movement.
And if it knows its movement and we're not aware of the movement in our conscious brain, does that even matter?
It does when our movement becomes a hindrance for its movement.
And then there's a turn in the road, like a sickness or a change in job. What are some of the signs that you could watch for?
Usually the body. Usually there's an illness. Usually the body starts to drag in a certain direction. And you're like, what's wrong with my body? What's wrong with my back? the back usually goes out. What's wrong with my back? Right?
Right.
Because there's no balance.
And what I see with that is because humans in general, I think, are fairly stubborn in coming out of old patterns. Usually it takes something in the body to shift before we pay attention.
Yes, because we haven't been paying attention to it until the body breaks.
Yes. And then
then you need to help them shift it because it's too painful for it to hold in that position.
Yeah.
That's what you do really well. And then you help them shift it, and then suddenly they start talking to you about all the things that they've been holding back on, all the things they haven't been able to do, all the things that they thought were important are not important, and suddenly there's a new agenda on the table.
Yes.
And that's usually when you know you've been running in the opposite direction of the archetype.
Yeah. Yeah. And once the balance is created back in the body, what I find is people are more apt to continue to keep moving forward because the pain stays away.
Mm.
And they I think anyone would like that sense of wholeness again. But people, once the pain shifts, they're much more aware of how to keep it at bay based on why it went there in the first place.
Well,
So
their thinking has also shifted, right, Christy? What happens with them is that when they come out of the other side, when you help them come out of that other birth canal, because they have to be reborn in this world. They suffer what we call a mini death.
Yeah.
That part of them has to die, because otherwise whatever is holding your back in pain or holding you in pain is not going to go away.
Right. It can't.
Yeah. This is the alchemical process. The transformative means that something has to die for something to be reborn. This is kind of the story of the ages. Something has to give for something else to grow. Because whatever is in place will not allow the other thing to come out.
And that's usually a belief.
Yes, exactly.
That is very powerful, and it's an energetic belief and or experience, and then it becomes physical, that is that alchemical process we're talking about. And as it becomes physical, then we notice it because it shows up as pain or discomfort, bringing awareness to the belief or pattern that continues to keep getting more dense in your energy system, and then it settles into your physical body. For me, the alchemical process in that is noticing it, and then the person literally making a conscious change out of the pattern, and the body follows the pattern of thought because thought is less dense than our physical flesh.
But you have to help them create the story, because you make it sound so easy. So I'm going to put some words to it. So you basically have to help them create the story, the narrative that they're going to walk out of this situation into. So you're going to create what is called, I'm going to call it today, a transition narrative. A narrative that transitions the story to something different than what it was. So whichever way I couldn't move, I couldn't help myself, I was in so much pain. There's a transition into a different narrative. I'm freed up. I've learned that certain things are not worth it. I want to create something. I want my life to mean something. I want people to remember me in a certain way. I want to be part of this community, whatever it is. It starts to come from that narrative that you transition them to.
Yeah. And I think it's important that in hearing this, let me give an example of a really easy example of what this is that we're talking about. Say like the body, depending on how your feet land on the planet, which direction they're in. Say, for example, if you walk and both feet go out while you walk, a lot of people have that stance. And in the psychosomatic world, what that indicates is a little bit of confusion within someone's own system about which direction do I head in, and is it the right direction? And these people sometimes will have difficulty figuring out what is right for them based on just their feet going in different directions. So what you're talking about is the change, yes. And as the person physically pays attention to walking straighter into the world, both feet straight, it's very uncomfortable for most people to change how they show up in the world, how their feet are. And it's uncomfortable, they don't like it, and they do want the change enough, though they're willing to create that change consciously first, and really starting paying attention to how they come into the world physically, which does begin to change energetically, a better balance in their right and left brain and how they think. So they're a participant in their body, not just their intellect.
Yes.
Which I think is really important, because I find most people like to just think out the process. They don't physically want to change the process.
Yes.
Because it's uncomfortable. It really is. We're used to a certain way. And pain, physical pain, begins to open our minds to being okay with being uncomfortable.
I think it's the ability to recognize what you're talking about. I think that's where you are unique in what you do. You make them conscious of their body and the way it's moving and how it moves and why it's moving that way. What is the story behind its movement? And what is it trying to tell you about your own movement in the world?
Yes, because I think it's very important to learn how we move.
Yeah.
And how to move in a more empowered way, literally in our physical flesh, not just our minds.
Yeah. So the feelings of liberation are the ability to be anchored to this reality while still being able to stare or be in the stars.
Yes.
That's the trick of balance. I'm in two places at once. I can have my creation, my imagination, but I also need my body to be there present.
Yeah, that is the integration piece.
Yeah, it's a beautiful motif, because it's not looked at in that way. There's always a disconnection aspect in people's thinking about body and mind, but they're not disconnected, they are one. And that's the problem. The old thinking, or the thinking that they're two separate entities, is incorrect. It's just your consciousness is at different levels. So your body's consciousness is at one level, your psychic consciousness is at another level, your maturity consciousness is at another level, your emotional consciousness is at another level. So there are different layers to the aspect of consciousness. And there's no better or worse consciousness. They're both conscious. Thus the archetype, I am that I am. What are you? I am that I am. I am. What are you? Right?
Yeah.
So this is the part of what we are thinking about and talking about. Archetypal patterns are about awakenings. It's about awakening to the power that moves us in the universe. It's about awakening to an understanding of the world that is invisible to us with our ordinary eyes.
So if we chose, I think it'd be helpful to understand. So for example, an archetypal pattern of a warrior
Ooh.
moving in the world in a positive way, and or we could say a shadow way, or in a blind way. Could you give us an example of that?
Well, the warrior moving in a positive way in the world would be somebody who would maybe get into law enforcement and lock up the bad guys or the bad gals, whoever it is that's being bad. They're the ones who protect us. They're the ones who know right from wrong. So if we take that character who knows right from wrong and he loses the love of his life and he becomes cynical because he's traumatized by losing love. So then he decides, well, you know, these drug busts, who gets this money anyway? Why don't I take a little bit? But the problem is once you cross a certain line, there's no going back. You've crossed it. There's no, let me take this back. No, there are consequences for crossing that line. So what happens is that they acquire shadow self. And so the shadow takes over the warrior. And then the warrior becomes bitter and angry, and he acts out of pettiness and revenge and callousness and against everything that he had held sacred, or she had held sacred. They turn against all of that. They find it all as blasphemy. Like one day you believed and the next day you don't believe anymore and it's over. That's when you start to see the shadow. That's where the shadow becomes. Now there are warriors that are disembodied. They're walking around, they're warriors. They carry themselves like warriors. Christy has seen them. Physically, they carry themselves as warriors, but they're very kind and loving and greeting, and they're disembodied from the archetype. So they look strange. You know, you look at them and like, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to do something else. Why are you doing that? And usually that's the question you ask yourself when you see something that does not fit in the archetypal spectrum. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit there. Okay, so somebody's out of line. That's what you say to yourself. Somebody's not standing in line correctly.
Yeah.
That's a different cue. They should be standing over there. They're standing over here. They shouldn't be walking right here. They should be walking over there. Okay. And that's when it gets a little tricky, because are we like telling people what they should be doing or not should be doing? No, it's their bodies that are telling them what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. We're not. Their bodies start to get in the way because the path they've chosen is contradictory to the path they were born to run.
Yeah.
And that's what people find hard. It's like, well, what do you mean I was born to run? I was born to hop and skip and jump. Well, no, you were born to run. This is how it works. So we're all born to run in different directions. And all those directions of the four, or the primary four, as Christy has put it. And I think of the primary four like the four elements. I think it's elemental that there's four. because it's reflected in other archetypal instances that there's 4. So anyway, to get back to the point, but being able to see yourself, a warrior who self-sabotages their jobs, not because they're hateful or angry or disrespectful, is because they lose their ability to see what the mission is, what the path is.
Yeah, and just speaking of warrior, what I see with that archetype in people is a lot of burnout. The warrior being on all the time and not allowing rest in between whatever battle they might be in.
Yes.
And then physically, how I see that, it shows up as quite a few kidney infections or kidney shutdown, because the body's always in that fight or flight rescue mode.
Yeah.
And or
Heart problems,
fibromyalgia will show up because the body it's not resting in between whatever they're stepping into, because they tend to step into many things.
blood pressure, usually physical, your blood pressure, your eye pressure, also your eyes start to twitch and pop out of order. Yeah.
And so each archetype, what I'm learning with you, Dr. Lahab, is each archetype has a physical pattern as well that starts to show up when it's out of balance.
Yes.
And so the more that we can understand about ourselves, what our archetype might be, what are the characteristics of it when it's fully empowered and when we're disempowering ourselves unconsciously, how does that look?
Yeah, I mean, Cobb, for example, he had kidney failure. It was stage 3, and that reversed itself when he was treated using JAMP. That reversed where he is no longer stage 3, stage 1. He's doing great because it was wrecking him. His trauma was pulling him from his energy. It was standing in its way. It was pushing against him. It was pushing down on him. It was squeezing him. And so, yeah, that's where the pushing and squeezing and moving is the kidneys. Yeah. So, yeah. So they were affected directly because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the warrior has to, the warrior has to feel whole. That's the biggest thing. All of the archetypes have to be whole, except for the magician, because they work without feeling whole, but then they get into trouble.
And so let's talk about the magician a little bit, if we could do the 4, so we can better understand them. So with the magician, what do you notice when they're embodied and when they're not?
They have a lot of dark visions. So a lot of schizophrenics, a lot of paranoia, a lot of mental health illnesses, hip magicians.
I can see that.
That would be because they're always in a state of, is this the reality I'm in, or is this another reality? Anytime you lose perspective, you could go into a breakdown because it's you've climbed up really high.
And do magicians tend to, we hear the word empath a lot. Are you empathic? And that's taking on other people's energy. Would that, if a person's very empathic, they fall into the category of magician?
Yes. Also, if they're not aware of their empathy, and their empathy is basically turned on all the time like a faucet, and it's flooding everywhere, and it's flooding the person who is empathic, because now they have to keep themselves from everybody else, because everybody else's story is killing them.
Yeah.
So that's what the magician's task is to learn how to not be overtaken by feelings of pain and hurt, because they see it. And not only do they see it, they're conscious of it. And they're not just conscious of it, they see it in you. And they see how much it's hurting you. And so the natural inclination of an empathic human being is, let me take this off of you. The problem is that the magician, whatever they take off of you, they take onto themselves. When they are not conscious.
Yes.
When they're conscious, they could only take so much. So they try to limit their time, because there's only so much they could take off you. Because otherwise it makes them sick. It makes them physically ill. They suffer a lot of physical illness because of contamination, contagion by other people whose psyches are in chaos. And especially, go on.
Some of those would be perhaps some anxiety or depression.
Definitely depression and anxiety, definitely. Because they, magicians who are disembodied, or magicians who don't feel whole, tend to start questioning their existence. So Freud says that depression is rage turned inward. And that's exactly what the magician does. The magician turns the rage inward. Instead of being rageful outside, that's what we call the dark magician. They rage internally, so they're dying. They're in a fire.
Yeah, and they're not aware. I would say they're probably not aware that that is what's happening.
Yeah, they're not aware of it, and which fuels the fire, which fuels my paranoia that the world is out to get me. They're the ones who say the world's out to get me. You don't know the world.
A magician says that.
Magicians say that, yeah, because when they talk about the world, what they're talking about is the structure, the archetypal structure of the world.
Okay, so you would never hear that out of the mouth of a warrior.
They don't think that in those terms.
Okay, that's helpful.
They think in terms of, those people are out to get me. The magician is talking about the universe.
Right.
They're not talking about the car dealership. They're not talking about, the guy who fixed the roof. They're not talking about the job that laid you off. They're not talking about those things. Their fight is with the universe.
Yeah.
Because their main, the characteristic of the magician is that they can tinker. So, well, if they could tinker, that means you could tinker with the universe. That's when you get in trouble.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So you end up tinkering with stuff. You're like, well, it doesn't have to be this way. Because that's how the archetypal energy works. It doesn't have to be this way. It could be different. Who said this is how it's supposed to go? This is because I find myself saying these things all the time.
Right.
And people like look at me like, who do you think you are? You're so arrogant. It's like, but this is the archetypal magician. They can't help themselves. It doesn't make sense to them that everybody's bowing to the same thing. It looks funny. It looks like a caricature. Well, why are you doing that? Who told you? Why? Are you serious? What are you guys up to? It's that incredulous look on my face, like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is a circus, and you basically are playing your role in the circus. So either you're a performer, that could be an animal or a human. You could be one of the people who is behind the scenes feeding the performers, or you could be part of the crowd, or you could be security or whatever, support staff, but you're in the circus. You've decided that the circus is where you live. So the magician is incredulous about that. It's like, you don't live in a circus. Why do you have to act like you live in a circus? You don't have to be here. But look at my world. Look at it. Look at how it looks. It's like, yeah, but you can recreate that. That's what the magician says. You can recreate that world that you live in. You can always know they're magicians when they say you could recreate the world you live in. None of the other archetypes say shit like that. The queen or king will say, I will create. The magician says, you can create.
Interesting.
It's very, very clear always. You know, I live in a nightmare. You don't have to live in a nightmare.
And that's magician speaking back.
Yeah, only the magician says that. Well, because only the magician knows that the creation is a projection.
Yes.
It's not real. It's only when I believe it that it's real. So then the magician would say something like, am I dreaming this, or are we having a podcast? Why are we having a podcast if I'm dreaming it? Only the magician would say that.
Well, I think I need my picture by the magician in the archetype book.
That's right. There you go.
My whole life is asking the question, well, why do I have to do it that way?
Exactly.
That I had to do that.
Yeah.
Who knows what's really going to happen when I die?
Yeah.
I've been that way from a very young child, which is,
Yeah.
I'm sure, was very frustrating for my parents. Because understanding it in that language is really helpful.
Yeah, they're the children who are always asking questions. Why?
Yeah.
Who said?
Yeah.
You say God, and then you open up a whole like thing. Is like, what do you mean God? What, he sits up there? Where does he sit on a chair? You know, so you open up a huge. So why do you look like that? Why do I look like this? Where did that come from? Was that God also? So the little kid is usually more inquisitive. They don't want to destroy and build castles and have moats. That's the warrior.
Yeah.
The lover wants to play and have a tea party. That's what the lover wants to do. They want to talk.
So with the lover, let's go there.
Yeah.
How does that show up? What are some of the characteristics of the lover?
Well, the lover is very social. So when they're not social, they're sick. They're very sick. They're physically sick. They're probably way overweight. They're probably have a lot of illnesses, ailments, physical ailments. Glands are a problem. Birth is a problem. Love is a problem.
In what way?
They don't feel loved. They're not quite as depressed. When the magician gets depressed, the magician looks like they're dying, like their soul is being sucked out. With the lover, when they're depressed, they look like rivers are going to gush through them. Like you're going to see these gushing, like, and they get pinker. They get redder.
And so what does a lover need for better balance in their life?
Well, the lover has to do what the lover is.
Which
the
is love.
Lover is social. They connect everybody. They make peace. They don't let the warriors kill each other. So then you say, well, what would be a shadow lover? The shadow lover would make them kill each other.
To get their way.
Yeah.
For manipulation.
Yeah. So that's manipulation and abuse. The lover is content to love in the way they understand love, and people don't understand them.
Hmm.
They say things to them like, you love too much. Don't care too much. Why do you give a shit? That's what they say to lovers.
Oh, that's really helpful.
Yeah, so they say things like that because the lover is like, oh my God, I love them. They're amazing. They're like, you're like, why are you saying they're amazing? You say everybody's amazing. Why do you keep doing that? That's what the lover does. The lover feels she feels very deeply for the other. And when they're in love, they're in love.
Hmm.
Like everything they do is about love. And when they're out of love, they could be great friends, but they're out of love.
Do you have anyone that comes to mind in a movie that we could identify with the lover?
Yeah, I mean, the lover comes in all these movies where they're lost and they're looking for the other, or they don't know they're looking for the other, and the other shows up, and suddenly their life changes.
Okay.
So in any movie, in any love story, any movie, the lover is always lost, and then their life starts to make meaning when they meet the other. They're always kind of, when you think about the lover, you always think of, they always seem to be a half of something. They're always in search for another half.
And that's part of their languaging then too, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, that they will say, I'm looking for my other half. I've heard that.
I'm searching. Yeah, I'm searching for my other half, my soulmate. That's lover language, by the way.
Okay,
That's not magician language. That's a lover being cute, making fun of the magician. It's unconscious. Oh, what would the magician call it? A soul? Okay, we'll call it a soulmate. Yeah, we'll call it a soulmate. Because that's what the lover does. So they laugh at each other, right? So this is because we're not aware of the archetypal, but the archetypal is irritated by each other. They laugh at each other. They make fun of each other. Like, oh, look at the warriors. They're going to hurt themselves. Like little kids with knives, you know. The lover also, the lover plays. The lover finds it funny that, the magician can't get a date.
I can see that as well.
Oh, maybe it's what you're wearing. Maybe it's what you're saying. I don't know. Maybe you should just keep your mouth shut. It doesn't matter.
I've heard that before. Just don't ask those questions once again.
Yeah, just act normal. That's what they used to say to me. Just act normal. I don't know what that is, but okay.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Probably why we get a lot to Lahab.
I think this is the way that this is the way we address, and we don't understand. We know they have something to offer. We can't understand what they're offering because we evaluate them from a different angle. So the magician looks at the lover and goes, "You're not that pretty. What is it about you? Why are you so attracted to this person? Why is this person so attracted to you? You don't look like anything. You don't look that interesting. You have nothing to say." So that's the magician's retort, right? The magician breaks it down into pieces and tells you that all your pieces does not create a pie. You're short of a piece. So that's the magician's way of like being an ass.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, that's the trickster and the magician that comes out.
Yeah.
Well, you think you're funny. You're not that funny. It's because lovers like to make people laugh. Like comedians.
And are they musicians as well?
Yes, lovers are musicians because they want people to feel.
Yeah. So that's another piece of the lover.
Yeah.
Is to get
show up. Yeah. The person who writes the music can be the other archetypes. Like what do they call that? Metal. That's warrior singing or trying to sing.
I hear that music at my head. Metal music.
Yeah, so that's the warrior trying to sing. The warrior doesn't know how to sing. When the French and Germans get together, right? The Germans laugh at the French because they have because they take such a long lunch. They eat for 2 hours and talk. And so the Germans look at them as like, all they do is talk nonsense.
Which is warrior.
This wine, that thing. Yeah. Yeah, the Germans are very warrior-like culture. So the lovers drive them crazy, but at the same time, they're seduced by them. So when they try to act like them, they try to sing in the beer halls, they look completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, their songs look ridiculous. They look, if somebody, you know, the French are from these type of cultures, you know, love is very easy to sing. Even the language houses the archetype. Even in language, the words that you use, how you use those words, that shows the archetype. The archetype always shows, it always flashes its identification. Hey, I'm a magician. It always flashes its identification. It's not hidden.
And with that, so you have, like, for instance, the warrior and lover. Are these 4 specific archetypes? Do they, as partners, are they attracted to each other?
They pull towards each other all the time. Warriors and lovers always pull towards each other. Like, what do you like about him? Well, you know, he looks really strong. Warriors and lovers will always be attracted to each other.
Okay.
They're opposites, they attract.
And I would imagine there's probably quite a bit of chaos when they attract, when there's issues.
If the lover is not embodied, or if the warrior is not embodied, chaos. So if the warrior is not embodied, there'll be abuse.
Physical abuse.
Physical abuse.
And what about the lover? What would that look like?
Serial betrayals of all kinds. The lover will dream up ways to make your life miserable. They will sleep with your biggest enemy just to get at you. When a lover is hurt, they can go to no bounds of how to torture you.
So it's more covert for the lover.
It's very, very covert. It's more like, I slept with so-and-so. I know you'll find out one day. I'll just make sure it happens for you.
Yeah.
You'll stumble on a piece of paper, and then you'll put the pieces together, and then you'll go, fuck, I can't believe that. Yes. That's what the lover does.
Well, that's helpful too. And let's talk about the king queen.
Yes.
So we get all 4 in there.
So the queen is very interesting because the queen, the magicians are always attracted to the queens. They unconsciously surround themselves by queens.
And how does that balance out then?
Well, the queens understand the language of the magician, but they use it to keep an eye on everybody else.
The queen uses the magician to keep an eye on everyone else. That makes sense.
Because she doesn't see where betrayal is going to come from. The magician always sees it. You know, the magician will say to her, look at the look on her face. She wants to kill you. And the queen goes,
I have no idea.
I really, you think so? Maybe she's just angry. No, she wants to kill you. So the magician is usually, you can't have too many of them. They create chaos if you have too many in the same place.
Too many magicians?
Yeah, because they create chaos. They start to, like if you have you know, the magician is always the kid who watches the other kids fight it out
Mm.
and then tells them, are you finished? Can we get back to breakfast? That's usually the magician. The queen will command order with her siblings. Everybody will sit, everybody will shut up, they will not talk. We're going to have a decent meal. And they listen. It's
They're the
because
ones
her
that say-
energy. when she's embodied, it's her energy. That's
Yeah.
how she holds everybody in place. When a queen barks out orders, when she says this is how it is, everybody listens. Why?
Yeah.
Well, did you hear her? That's what they say. Did you hear her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
That's
a
when the
good
queen
example.
speaks.
I'm sure we've all met the queen.
Oh, yes. All the time. We meet them all the time.
Yeah. And I hear people, we do identify people in their archetype not being aware that that's what we're doing, because
Yeah.
that's what we say, she's such a queen.
Yeah.
And you just know to back away that there's no changing the queen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the magician knows that they influence the queen. So the way the magician works is that the magician doesn't like the queen having too much power. So they usually do something to sabotage. That's when they get in trouble. That's when they get thrown in the dungeon. Because
Yeah.
there's a trickster side. There's an element where it says she cannot think she is everything. That will get her killed.
Mm.
So they will create some kind of chaos to show her that she's not in charge. But it's more of this is what you're not awake to.
Right.
And it's usually before an event happens, a bad event, like because the premonitions are already coming to the magician that something bad's going to happen. And this person is not prepared.
Mm. So they probably unconsciously find a magician.
Yes, absolutely.
Attract them into their life, whether that be a spouse or a friend. And that's who they're asking for. What do you think about?
Yeah,
So
what do you think? Yeah, what do you think?
yeah.
This is what I think. What do you think?
And with the king energy talking about men, is that the same kind of pattern as
The king energy always needs the magician, but always has a advisor who's a magician, but who doesn't say they're a magician. Where the queen is conscious of the magician, the king doesn't want to be conscious of the magician. So they have advisors.
So it is a little bit different.
So the advisors, one of them is a magician, if not more. They're either fighting with each other for his well, they're fighting with each other for his power.
Yeah.
Or they're outdoing each other. It's like, oh, you did that. Well, guess what I could do? Whatever you could do, I could do better. So they get trapped in that atmosphere. Usually politicians, with politicians, they're behind the scenes.
Right.
They're the speechwriters, they're the policymakers, they're the ones that you never see their name or face. They're the ones who are doing everything else in the background.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You didn't meet Sarah. Did you meet Sarah's best friend's daughter? Sarah
No.
She writes those speeches. She sits in the background. She's a magician, right?
Yeah.
She's like, I wanted to go to Chile twice. I submitted my papers and they rejected me twice. I said, how many times do you want them to reject you to let the universe know that it's told you to stop? You don't need to go to Chile. And she's like, I knew that. So, you know, I was hoping you'd tell me something else. No, I'm not going to tell you. It was pretty clear. But that's what they do.
Yeah, something she already knew.
The queens in a lot of roles, when they're fully embodied, they carry a lot of power.
Mhm. I bet they do.
Like even in their age, as they age, people look at them and say, "Oh, do you know that's so and so?" We don't know who so and so is, but that's so and so. They become a so and so.
So Maya Angelou to me would be a queen archetype.
Yes, very
Is
much.
that correct?
Yeah,
Because that's how people refer to her.
yeah.
And I would say even her, everything about her presence held the energy of a queen.
Oprah is a queen archetype.
Yeah, she's a good example too.
Yeah, the excellent example of a queen archetype.
And I would say both her and Maya Angelou holding the light side of the queen, they're beautiful examples of leadership in that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the queen is embodied. The queen has immense power, and people trust her. And
Yeah,
trust what she says and trust her words.
yeah,
The Queen of England right now is like she's old, and she's coming to a point in her life where it's ending. Everybody lives in fear that the queen might die. Who would take her place is the question, right?
yeah, that is the question.
So it's interesting. It's like, well, there are a lot of potential heirs, but the queen has so much psychic energy projected on her that it holds her.
Well, and don't you think with that, with the Queen of England, like that architecture of how that used to be is also changing?
Yeah, but they have a myth that they live by. They have a monarchy. What was that?
Is that the myth that they're under the realm of the queen?
Yeah, under the protection of the queen, under the protection of the empire, under the protection of. So this is a myth. This is a long-term myth. They were able to cut the power out of the monarchy and keep the myth alive. Therefore, the power of the myth has kept them in power.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why, there's stories, and that's why they need some scapegoats, and that's why they need people to fall on their sword. It's part of the intrigue. It's part of the mythology. If you don't have it, then you're not really a royal family. So
Yeah,
that's why people, that's why they're throwing Prince Andrew under a bus right now. Prince Andrew has always been a sex offender. It was not new. Everybody knew that. From little ones to the big ones, it's one family. You live in the same house.
mhm.
Everybody knows about everybody else because it's either in the tabloids. Who are you hanging out with? It's either the Secret Service of whichever country is trying to find flaws and control certain parts of you. These are the things that happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with the queen, what on the physical side, just so we do each one of them, what are some of the physical ailments that they might get not being embodied or integrated?
The queen's ailments are in her hands.
So like arthritis.
Arthritis is one of them. It's a big one. Thank you for introducing yourself. Throat, as we have.
Because we have to measure what we say.
Welcome to our podcast. That's okay.
You're all right.
That's okay. Come here. Tell us more about the queen. You're in the podcast now.
About the queen.
Sorry about that, folks. I think that the queens are people who have to measure their words more often. Kings and queens have to be thoughtful because we're about gravity, right? And gravitas. So there's much more of a need to measure your speech. than there might be for some other archetypes.
Stay above the fray.
And that can occasionally lead to
Throat.
So-
constriction.
Constriction in throat, so you have hand problems, you have standing problems, standing straight, because you have to always stand straight. You always have to keep your chin up.
Yeah.
You always have to hold yourself in a certain way. So certain things happen because you're always holding yourself up in that certain way. So your shoulder, your back, your neck.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My apologies for the interruption.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Well, welcome to our podcast, Sarah Wardman. That was Sarah. So that's where I think that's where we start to see how the four kind of play together, don't play together.
I think it's really helpful to understand how they play together, because those are the people in our lives.
Yes. So usually what happens is that lovers take on queens because they're looking for money.
Mm,
That's usually when you see the shadow of the lover, or kings.
yeah, either one.
Either one. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what gender it is.
Mm,
Works the same way. So
very nice.
yeah, that's when you have problems. That's when you have unruly warriors who don't respect the queen. Then you have a problem, because what that shows is that they don't respect the hierarchy, and that's part of their programming. They're going against their own energy. That's when warriors get dangerous, because they take basically the power to enforce justice instead of being a force for justice, and justice is an archetype.
That's a very different way of seeing that, Dr. Lahab.
Yeah, justice is an archetype, right? Justice means that this way is right, and then there's this injustice is the other archetype.
Yeah.
Well, that was unjust. Well, that was just, okay. Those are archetypal patterns.
Yeah. Telling us which way to go once again.
Exactly. And that we have free choice.
Yeah.
This is where when we talk of the archetypes and we talk about patterns and we say they move you and take you, and they do, but also along the way you have choices, even though the game has already been played, but you can make those choices. You can make those mistakes again and again and again,
Yeah.
because they'll let you do that.
Yeah. And that is where power, I think that is power is choice.
Yeah.
Every sense of the word.
Yeah. And then the more we see ourselves as within ourselves, the more we see ourselves within ourselves, the more we are a part of ourselves, the less these become a problem,
Yeah.
because then we move with the energy. We're not fighting ourselves. We're not fighting our physical body, I think, is one of the things that you were saying. Why are we fighting ourselves? We're not fighting our physical body. We're actually flowing within the energy.
Yeah. And it logically to me makes sense if you understand the energies of the archetype. You're more aware when you step out of alignment of that energy, you're going to get a drainage somewhere in your system.
Yes.
And that's when over time you will become sick or pain sets in, because that is out of balance.
Yes. And you're out of balance as long as you are not true to self. Is the old mythological saying. Be true to yourself and you won't be out of balance. And they're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, it means that you have to be, when your path is open, you can't pretend that's not your path.
That's where courage comes in.
Yeah.
And conscious choice.
Conscious choice, for sure. So we know that destiny is when something happens. The archetype of destiny is when something happens. And we know that karma is the archetype of when nothing happens. We say, oh, that's karma.
Yeah.
I spun in a car, I didn't die, that's karma. That's the other archetype. So you have archetypes of energy flowing through, pushing and weaving their way through this integration of different archetypal patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a form, there is a logic, there is a connection, and they move in certain ways because we see it over and over and over and over and over again from the youngest children's animation stories to the ones that are for adults who are not afraid to go into the dark.
Yeah.
You could see it, you could see the archetypal patterns over and over again. You could always tell what's going on, what's happening, who's doing what and why and how. And that's where you become like intuitive. You walk in, you're like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you over there?
Yeah. And you begin to recognize the patterns in people, the patterns in yourself, which to me, long-term, indirectly will affect your emotional well-being, your physical well-being because of the awareness.
Yes. Yes, that's what liberates you. The awareness and the integration of the awareness that becomes a part of you.
Yeah.
There's an awareness, I see it, I know what it is, I know it's right there. And then the integration part is I accept it. I want to do this. I want it to be mine. I believe in this.
Yeah.
I'm going to create this. And then there's the other part. And so those two parts work hand in hand. When there's one part that says, yeah, I know what it is, but I don't want to deal with it. Okay. You'll deal with it whether you like it or not.
Yeah. It does show up either way.
That's not up to you. But you could play that game if you want. And that game has a very short rope.
Yeah.
You find yourself dangling at any moment. At any moment, you're going to find yourself dangling in some kind of wind. And the question is always like, I don't know how I made it out the last time, but I know I didn't do all the right things. Those are people who habitually go against the grain.
Yeah. And that's where it creates so many issues in their system.
Yeah. So lovers have a lot of eating disorders.
So that's another piece I hadn't heard of before.
Yeah, absolutely. Starvation, when you starve yourself, anorexics, those are lovers. That's a way of control. That's the control love. Who goes to war with love? Lovers.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty profound, Dr. Lahab.
Yeah, it's so we use JAMP with eating disorders, and it works beautifully.
To help them see what they love about themselves, or to see or embody that love.
The more they're embodied, the less they're willing to strike out against the body. The more the body becomes sacred, the more it's not at war with me.
Which comes back to what you read in the beginning.
Yes.
Of self.
Self is always trying to organize. It is the archetype of order. It's trying to put everybody in place and move them into the situation. It's the holding sun.
Yeah.
In our cosmos, it's the holding sun. So there are many suns. So this sun Earth sun, we call it, because we're closest to it. It holds everything in gravitational. It keeps everything moving in the way. The sun would be the self.
That's a good example.
Yeah,
A good example.
that's the order.
Well, very, very fascinating conversation today, Dr. Lahab.
Yes, and I think we
so
took up
much.
enough time from everybody today. We ranted a little bit. Did I rant? I sometimes rant.
I love these kinds of conversations, so I would say no, because
Okay.
I learned so much about each archetype and languaging, and then the body piece. And for me, that's really helpful too, as I work with people. I can see them through a different lens versus just my lens,
Yeah. It
and
would be
help them
good to
understand.
draw them,
Yeah,
draw a picture of the way the archetype moves and thinks, and yeah.
yeah. So I learned a lot. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed our conversation as always. With that, I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. This is When Destiny Calls. This is Christy Foster. Christy, you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for coming. And this is certainly the place, I would say, to learn more about you so you become liberated and can experience more freedom in your own health and your own psyche. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Christy. And we'll be back next week to carry this fascinating conversation of how the archetypal patterns weave their way into our world. We're also having a class, and you can find it on the Jam Training Institute site. That's www.jamtraininginstitute.com. We also will have it on the www.instituteforconflict.com. So if you want to check us out, it will be starting at the end of February. We'd love to have you there and get a more in-depth view of what what we've been talking about in bits and pieces, get a really in-depth view with Christy, myself, and Lance Allred. Okay, everybody have a good week, and we will see you next week.